Okay, so thank you for coming, guys. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about addiction. I put together a presentation that I've called Addictive Thinking, where I want to bust some myths about addiction and talk to you about my journey and trouble through that, and how some of it might be different from how you might have thought about it before. So let's jump in. I can share my screen. Okay, so first off, drugs. Drugs are bad, okay? This is a common thing that we hear people talk about, that drugs are just not a good thing. They're addictive, they kill people, they're just not good, right? Except when you think about alcohol, see, alcohol's equally as intoxicating as drugs, and it actually causes more deaths, at least in the UK, every year, and it's legal. Now, David Nutt, he was a drugs advisor for the government about drugs policy, basically. He actually said, I think around 2008, 2009, before he got fired, he said if alcohol was found today, it would be Class A. And the reason he actually did get fired, because he said, based on the science, ecstasy should be downgraded from Class A to Class B. And the government said, you can't go on record and say that. And he went, but science. So they had a bit of a fallout about that. Now, this might seem like a bit of a tangent, but I want to think about a fork. Now, is a fork good or is a fork bad? Now, that doesn't really make any sense, right? It's the wrong question. See, a fork is good if you want to eat pasta, but a fork's actually pretty bad if you want to eat soup. And that's because it's not really good or bad. Good and bad is a value judgment that humans put on it, like it's what we project onto it. Really, what we mean is, in this context, a fork is useful, and in this, it's not. Okay, so back to the drugs. In the Vietnam War, when the Americans went to Vietnam, they ended up a lot of the troops ended up smoking heroin, and a lot of it because it was available over there, and there was not much they could do to stop them. And the government were really afraid that when the troops came back, they were all going to be addicted, and they'd had this big epidemic on their hands. But interestingly, what happened was, when they came back, 95% of them just quit. Didn't have rehab, nothing like that. They just quit and just went back to normal life. And I believe the other 5% of them, I believe they already had issues before they went away. So if they were able to have been smoking drugs and then come back and just quit, it beggars the question then, is it the drug itself that's the addictive thing? Well, this is what the Canadian psychologist Bruce K. Alexander wanted to look at in the 70s after the war. And he did a bunch of studies that he called the rat park studies. So essentially, the first part of it was they got rats and put them in a cage on their own. And they gave them 2 bottles of water. One bottle was laced with drugs. It was either cocaine or heroin, I think. And the other bottle was water. And they looked, well, what happens? Well, what they found was, generally, if not the whole time, the rat just drank itself to death on the drug water, which kind of adds to the hypothesis, well, it's the drug that's addictive. However, when they then did the next lot of studies, they created what they called rat park, or this rat paradise, where they had these cages where they were huge, and there's loads of other rats and loads of stuff for them to do. It's basically like Butlins for rats, if you like. And they then had these 2 bottles in there. They had the drug bottle and they had the non-drug bottle. And what they found was that the rats didn't really touch the drug bottle. They pretty much left it alone. They might have sipped it a little bit, but they pretty much just left it. So again, if that's the case, we have to ask, is it really the drug? So this is what led this guy called Johann to talk about in his book, Chasing the Scream. I really highly recommend his book. He's a journalist who wrote about the war on drugs and about drugs policy around the world in his sort of search to understand addiction. And he's got a TED talk where he kind of summarizes all of this. And he said that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection, relating to the rats connecting with each other, for example. And he said it's not the object, it's not the thing, it's not the pill or whatever it is, it's not the substance, it's your cage, as in like it's your environment. Yeah, if you think about the Vietnam vets, you know, they were a terrible environment, so they get high, and then they come home, better environment, they stop. And then there's this guy, Gabor Maté. So this guy is I think he's Canadian, and he works with a lot of crack and heroin addicts who are homeless. He himself has actually got an addiction, or at least he did have, for buying classical music, of all things. And he wrote a book on this and his work with people who struggle with addiction, called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And what he found was that a lot of people who struggle with addiction, they've got trauma. And what he says is addiction is a painkiller. And he says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. But for me, that's not quite the full story. Because if we come back to what Johann was saying, I would say that actually the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection to ourselves. See, for me, it's not just about the cage we're in, it's actually about our internal cage. It's about our beliefs and our perceptions about ourselves and about the world, because that is what defines what our world looks like. So, let me tell you about my journey. I used to love a drink back in the day. Now, and that was because it allowed me to be more sociable. Like I could have a few drinks, loosen up, and have a good time, which I think a lot of people would agree with. But I would say, does that really make sense? Because a bit of backstory, I was a pretty miserable teenager. Well, I was pretty miserable from about the age of 11 or 12. And I didn't really start drinking at all properly until I was about 24. And I was quite quiet. Not that there's anything wrong with being quiet, but I always felt like I wanted more interaction. I was terrible at talking to people of both sexes, and I always felt like a bit of an outsider. Well, when I wanted to start branching out in my mid-20s and making more connection with people, I found that alcohol was fantastic because it seemed to just cure my social anxiety. Or at least that's what it looked like to me. That's what I believed. Now, interestingly about alcohol, people will say it gives you confidence, but it doesn't. It actually just lowers your inhibitions. And there's quite a difference there. And the example I would give is, it's the difference between trying to cross a road and not even thinking or worrying about the cars and just stumbling out, and being on the edge of the road and knowing there's cars and knowing you have to check and then having the confidence to cross. Okay, that's the difference. And that's why drunk people get hit by cars, because they're not even thinking about the cars. They just walk, and then it's just luck. Which then, coming back to drinking, is why, you know, you might have a few drinks and then you say or do something, and then the next morning there's all the guilt with it. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, because we broke all of our rules, all of our inhibitions. Sorry, because those inhibitions weren't, you know what I mean. So I believe that the key here is that I believe that alcohol gave me something that I didn't have. It gave me this ability to socialize and not be self-conscious. That's what I believed. So then I got into a relationship shortly after that, after a while, but it quickly got very difficult and I was miserable again. And as a result, I spent less time with my friends and I felt quite trapped. Now, I wasn't actually objectively, because, you know, you're never really trapped in a relationship, but I felt trapped, and I felt trapped by my circumstances as well. I felt trapped by work and everything else. So how did I deal with that? By getting drunk and watching Netflix. My brain went, what makes you feel better? Have a drink. So I had this process of getting home and thinking about all the things that made me feel bad, about like the relationship that I couldn't fix, and about how I wanted to leave my job but I couldn't because I was stuck, because I wasn't going to get anything else, and all that stuff. And then my brain would go, how can we solve this problem? I know, let's have a drink. That'll make me feel better. That's made me feel better in the past. And it was also then an excuse to not do anything else. It was like, well, I can't do anything hard that I can fail at, like trying to write a song or learn a new song, because, well, I've been drinking now. And then I'd end up watching Netflix and drinking till 2 a.m. And then I'd wake up hungover, and then I'd go to work, have a bad day, and get home. And then I'd repeat the whole thing over again. You see, this was my mind trying to kill the pain, or trying to, you know, in terms of what Gabor Maté was saying, this was my painkiller. But really then it was not, it was trying to avoid the pain. But notice how it's kind of morphed. Now, alcohol first was the thing that I was using as this kind of gave me this special power, and now it's my painkiller. Well, long story short, I made some pretty bad decisions as a result of my drinking, and I ended up splitting up with my girlfriend, and I quit. Okay, and then but then I locked myself away for a little while because I was like, well, I can't go out and socialize now because I haven't got my magic drink. Now, again, objectively, I could have done, but I was actually too scared to continue drinking. And in a way, it seemed like it forced me to do. I was like, well, I've got to try and socialize sober. So I did. And I then learned to do that, which I'd never thought I could do before. So once I then did that kind of solved that problem, but then I was still miserable. I was still miserable and hard on myself. So how did I deal with that? Well, I ended up lifting weights and getting into my fitness, which you could say is a good thing, right? Because I'm doing something positive. But I got really obsessive over it. And it was fine when it was, or at least it seemed fine when it was going well. You know, when I had a target, when I had this schedule to stick to. But I'd get really, really fucked off if it started to go wrong. Like if I had to miss a workout, or if something got in the way, or if I couldn't quite lift the weight I thought I should be able to lift, I'd then get really, really downhearted and pissed off with myself. And I was always then trying to add more weight. There was like another thing that I had to get to, or I was then trying to add running in on the top. And I don't know if you've ever lifted weights and then tried to run at the same time and not giving yourself a break, it screws your body up, and I ended up busting my knee. So in a way, I just replaced one addiction for another. And you have to ask, well, why? Why? Well, because for me, it all comes down to the beliefs and the perspectives that I had about myself and about what was possible. See, underneath it all, I believed that I just wasn't good enough and that I was not really lovable as a person. I didn't really consciously understand this at the time, but I believe really there was something wrong with me. And so in some ways, my brain is then trying to solve that problem the whole time, and it's just finding different ways to do it. So with the going out and socializing, so the alcohol, the belief is that it means I can socialize and have friends because I can't talk to people. Like it gives me these special powers to stop me being self-conscious. That's the belief I have. And yet then when I'm stuck in the relationship and the job that I can't get out of, alcohol means that I can stop feeling bad. Like this is my painkiller because the belief is I can't handle this. I can't handle the situation. I can't solve this problem on my own. So alcohol is the thing that I use to solve it. And then with the weightlifting, it's because weightlifting means that I'll be better because I'm not okay as I am. I believe that lifting weights would make me more attractive, that it'd make me a better person, it'd make me more likable. So this is a way of thinking about, if I was going to break down the kind of the addictive thinking. Now, I'm not saying this is true. This is just a model of looking at it. So if you've got a difficulty, some problem or some challenge, if there's a substance or behavior that it seems to help avoid it, that's the belief, or that's the perception at the time. They're doing this thing. So this, for example, was me. If I'm stuck in the flat, drinking helps me avoid this problem with work and my relationship. If I repeat that enough, that then reinforces this belief that, look, see, I can't handle this. I can't handle this without the alcohol. The pattern becomes more and more ingrained. And this is like the painkiller side of things. On the other side, so this is like where I was going out and drinking with my friends, or with the lifting weights. It's that the alcohol and the weightlifting. This helps me to do or solve the problem. So this helps me be better as a person. But again, if that behavior is then repeated, what we end up is the belief that I need this thing to do it. Like I can't socialize without the alcohol, or I can't be good enough unless I can bench press however many kilograms or whatever, or squat whatever it is. And what you and this is the magic pill side of things. This is that there's something outside of me that, you know, gives me these special powers. Magic pill or magic powers. It's just a way of thinking about it. But again, what you'll find with both of these, really, if you start trying to apply this to different situations, you'll see they're kind of the same. And that's why I say it's only really a model. It's a way of, they're both about a perception about capability. There's something that I don't think I can handle. I don't have what's within me to be able to deal with it, and therefore I need something outside of me to be able to change that, whether it's to make me better or it's to avoid it. And what that means is it makes that thing precious. Okay, that thing becomes, that's like this thing I can't lose. What comes with that preciousness, that sense of preciousness, is this fear of loss. And what I found, for example, was you know, when I was out drinking a lot, I could never get enough drink. Like every drink was, I'll feel even better, and then I'll feel even more connected to my friends, and I'll be able to tell them even more how much I love them. Or with the weightlifting as well, it's like I need to keep, I can't miss a workout because I've got to get that weight. I've got to get that weight. I've got to get that weight. Or on the, you know, on the other side, when I was in the flat, what I found was I'd always have to port was my thing because it was 20%, so it was more than wine, and it tasted like sugar. And I'd always have to have 3 bottles of port in the cupboard, and if it got low, I'd get really panicky. I was like, I've got to go to Tesco. I've got to get more. I've got to get more. It's the preciousness, and what comes with that is that fear of losing it, of not having it, because of what it will mean if I don't. So here are some patterns that you'll see, and again, I'm not saying that these are true as such. These are just a way of looking at it. On the avoidance side, you can get this sense of you can never get far enough away. It's like I keep digging, but I never get far enough away from it. And if you think, so from my example of being in the flat, like no matter how much I drank, I was always going to wake up the next day and still have work and my relationship to deal with. And then we get this perception though of that it's further to climb out the more we dig. Now again, that's not true. If you think about it objectively, whether you quit, if you've been doing, you know, if I'd have been doing that for 2 months or whatever, whether I did it for another 2 months or I quit that day, it's still the same process. But ingraining that pattern, it can seem like, you know, I'm so far into it. And you hear people say stuff like that, like I've been doing this for so long, or this is all I know. And on the other side, you know, with the do solve side, you find there's this, like I keep trying to climb, but I never get there. And I found this with the weightlifting, like whatever weight I got to, I just had to lift a little bit more, or a little bit more, a little bit more. You find it as well with people who struggle with eating disorders. It's like they'll have their target weight, but then they get down to that target weight and then they start believing, no, but actually I'll be happy then when I get to that next target weight. Like it lowers again, it lowers again. It's the same kind of thing. And what you find with that is there's this, there's a perception of it's further to fall. So I found it with the, you know, the weightlifting, so much I push it so high, and then it's like, oh, I can't do it. Fuck it. What's the point? You know, you get blowouts are the kind of thing that happen with this. Where you get that fuck it moment where you just go, fuck it, just throw it all out the window, stop climbing. Either way, with both, there's a sense of hopelessness that comes with it. There's this, I'm either digging, keep digging, or I'm trying and pushing, and eventually it's like, what's the point? Like this is a problem I can't solve. So the next thing for me though is, what about habits? Now this came up because I was talking to my friend Keith about this, and Keith said to me, where's the line between habit and addiction? And in all honesty, for me, it's a bit of a blurry one. So the example he gave me, he said, look, when I sit down to have dinner, he said, I always used to have wine with my dinner. And I'm used to then, now I don't have it anymore, but I still sit down and I go to reach for the wine and it's not there. And for me, this is what I said to him. I said, our brains work on this process called pattern matching, or anchoring, if you like, which is just a way of saying it works by associating things. So, you know, if I go like ba 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 ba, you'll think McDonald's, or, you know, Justin Timberlake, if you remember that far back before they stole it. Or like if you go to a traffic light, when there's a red light, you stop because your brain knows. In fact, this is so ingrained into us that we don't have to be thinking. We'll be driving, and then suddenly we come to and realize we're braking because our brain has seen that the person in front of us is braking because they've seen the red lights come on. One thing is connected to another. So in Keith's example, he sits down and his brain goes, this is dinner. So now there should be wine here. It expects wine. Now, if Keith is perfectly comfortable having dinner without wine, and to him that's no big stress, like that's okay, it might just be a fleeting thought. Like there's not necessarily going to be that much emotion attached to it. So he's literally going to be able to just let that go and go into having his wineless dinner because there's no fear, there's no uncertainty there, there's no problem there. However, if, for example, Keith has in his mind that there's no way that a wineless dinner is a possible thing, like steak dinner will be absolutely ruined if he has to have it without wine, well, that's a different story. Because if he sits down and realizes he doesn't have wine, one of two things might happen. He either has a panic because his dinner is going to be absolutely terrible, so he has to rush to the shop and go and find the wine because there's no way he's going to allow that to happen. There's no way he's going to allow to have dinner without wine because it's just not possible. And therefore, and through doing that, if he carries that through, he then never has to experience a wineless dinner. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because now dinner is always with wine. Or there's no wine, and because he's so angry and disappointed or whatever, that he has a terrible experience of dinner without wine because he's miserable and he's there going, I can't believe how terrible this is. And so it still becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like he never has a good dinner without wine because he's close to that. So for me, the question is when it's with habits and addiction, it's kind of a bit of a scale. A way of looking at it is like, does it make sense to keep doing this? Like, is this a problem? Because let's be honest, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. If you're happy having a glass of wine with dinner, it's not a problem. To be honest, if you're happy drinking a bottle of port every night, watching Netflix till 2 in the morning, and that's not a problem, it's not really a problem. It's only a problem when you want to change it, or when it's causing you. And that's another way of thinking about it. I forget who said it, but another way of looking at addiction is that it's continuing to do something even when you know that there's a problem associated with it. But that's how it ties into this. Like if you realize it's a problem, you have to look at, well, why? And that's often when there's the fear associated with the change. So again, I'm not saying this is true, but a way of thinking about it is that if you have a habit and you then have a strong emotion associated with that, that's where you have a potential for addiction. But for me, the important thing is it's the belief that holds that together. It's the story that we have about it. That's the thing that holds it in place. That's the thing that will drive the fear of the loss. You know, if I can't have that wine with my dinner, what happens if that port's not in the cupboard? What happens when I get home? Okay. Now, something that just to touch on here is this thing about identity. Something that we often think about with addiction is that it's just to do with the behaviour. But through talking with people, what you'll often hear them say, if you ask them like, well, you know, what happens if you give up or something like that, they'll say, well, who will I be without this? Like, what will my life be like without it? I definitely had it with the drinking. Now, interestingly for me, because I was kind of more scared about continuing to drink, and then I almost felt like was forced to quit, I went through that process of identity change, because I went from the guy who got messy with everybody to the guy who didn't drink. And if any of you guys have ever tried quitting, you'll know that you can get stick for it. People are like, oh, why are you drinking? You know, and you get all of the stick that comes with it. Well, I stuck through that, and then I became more comfortable being that person who doesn't drink. And what was really interesting to me was then most of my friends they changed their idea of my identity in their eyes. So that then, you know, I'd be the guy at the house party or the after party with his mug of tea, and that was my identity. So everybody just accepted it. And what was really funny was when randomers would turn up, as they do at house parties or after parties, if anybody asked me, even politely, oh, do you not drink? Like, people would descend on them to defend me, because because that was who I was. But the thing is that identity change is not an easy thing. It's a scary thing for people. That's why that comes up, like, who am I going to be without this? Even if working with people with eating disorders, you might say, like, an eating disorder, somebody would be quite happy to get rid of that, to be like, oh, I'd be really happy to be free of that. But you'll hear people say, like, who am I going to be? Like, who am I going to be if I don't have that anymore? It's a scary concept. And a way of thinking about it is because the ego, that bit of us that has all these beliefs, like, it really sees everything as terms of life and death. It's just different degrees of it. And it will see something like that, like a change in identity. It will see like a death sentence. Now, that seems a bit dramatic because you think, like, literally, mate, you're just thinking about quitting drinking. But it's more than that, because it's to the ego. It's like, what does that look like? This is what I'm used to. This is my certainty. This is where I belong. And so to change that, it starts to fear all those things about rejection and the uncertainty of the future. So, wrapping up, when we're looking at addiction and things that might be, say, habits or patterns that might be a problem, these are some questions that I like to ask, because for me, the first step is always awareness. The first one is, what does this give me that I don't already have? So whether it's weightlifting or drinking or drugs or whatever it is, like, what does this give me I don't already have? So this is looking for the superpower or the magic pill. What's the perception I've got that I'm going to get through having this external thing to me? The next question is, what does this help me avoid? Or the other one I like is, what happens or what does it mean if I stop? And those questions for me start to elicit those things we were talking about. The magic pill, the second one especially, what does it help me avoid? That can start to elicit the fear. Like, what am I afraid happens? Or again, what does it happen if I don't, or if I stop? We can start to look at what I'm afraid of. When we can start to get a picture of those things, that we're in a much better place to kind of to work on it. So, any questions, guys? Everybody's very quiet. No? None at all? Going once? Going twice? Okay. All right. Well, I'll assume then that I've covered everything in this presentation, and therefore there's nothing that you can think of. So I want to thank you all for coming, and for anybody who's watching the replay, if you do have any comments or questions, you can post them at the bottom of wherever this is posted, probably YouTube, or you can hop over to my website at dbch.co.uk and you can send me a message on there. I'd love to hear from you.